So, hello, fellow marketeers, brand builders, and data scientists. Here talking this today to the amazing Andrew Tindall, one of the leading advocates of looking at advertising effectiveness based on research and data. And what I really like about Andrew is the amount of data he brings to bear in solving our marketing issues we have today. So, welcome, Andrew. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So, if all the research you have assessed and all the marketing advertising insights you have gleaned, what are the most advertising mistakes or things that marketeers construe or miss in the first place?
That's a very, very big question to get us started, hey. So
It is.
there's a few things that I think spring to mind straight away. One's a very basic one around advertising must be heavily branded and suitable for a channel. So people still underestimate how many strong distinctive assets you should be using in your advertising and content and comms. And they also underestimate how much it's changed and how much more valuable, useful that is these days. So our media now is more skippable and gets less paid attention and gets less visual attention, even with TV. So marketers need to be, I will call nowadays omni-branding their content. So you must be consistently branding ads and assets throughout the creative in case someone just tunes in 20 seconds in, for example. I think this is why we see brand characters has always worked so well, because if you have a brand character in your ad, it is in essence branded 100% of the time. But also marketers need to start thinking about what their brand sounds like, because you can't close your ears, but visual attention is often fleeting. I still think marketers enter, I was writing about this morning, I think marketers misinterpreted the job of advertising. A lot of people still think its job is to sell, not to change behavior. People will argue with you about this today. An ad still should be selling. A salesperson sells. A salesperson can understand someone's issues and have a conversation and argue the contrary. Whereas advertising, its largest job needs to be building memory structures to influence behavior. And the outcome of that is some people might change behavior in favor of your brand. And then the more nuanced one, which you can't really write about because or post on LinkedIn about or even talk about on stage really, because you can't really get into the depth of the conversation that's needed, is the misinterpretation of what emotion is in advertising.
Oh, how fascinating.
Obviously, a lot of people know now that the power of intense, and we'll probably talk about this, but also positive emotion and how good advertising must elicit that. And that's great. A lot of people have now picked that up. But the issue is a lot of people fall for tropes with that. So yes, it's true. If you include a dog or a baby in your ad, good things happen. But that isn't the only way of eliciting a strong positive emotional response. The 5% of marketers that are probably quite in depth and into perhaps Orlando Wood's work and the stuff that I researched, looking at how things need to be more right-brained. A lot of our research and Orlando's original research looks at 10 to 15 kind of creative features that he would say capture broad attention and elicits this emotional response. There's 10 or 15 kind of creative features that do the opposite and sell rationally. That isn't a finite checklist. Orlando has defined those kind of features and led that kind of movement in advertising over the past decade. But the outcome is quite simple. It's about advertising needs to be inherently interesting and entertaining to those that aren't already interested in your brand. So, we know that emotion is important in advertising. It needs to be broadly interesting and enjoyable. It doesn't necessarily it has to be story or character. but you have to approach it from a creative and strategic point of view around, is my idea on content inherently interesting and entertaining? And there's many different ways of doing that. So I think, in summary, there's three things, very basic, that everyone can stop doing. You must brand your advertising heavily. The more assets I saw in my research of Effie, the more assets used in the work, the better things happen. And we can perhaps talk about what this means in short form and skippable social content, because the rules get even more complicated. And then secondly, the power of what emotion means. And also, it doesn't have to just be entertaining and storytelling, but there's a whole nuance around your advertising. Simply needs to be interesting to those not interested. So I think those are the three kind of things I see marketers struggling with at the moment.
Wow, there is a lot to unpack there. I could hardly type all the interesting things you were mentioning there, like between the lines. And I think so I made a few comments, and we'll start with things. I think what you mentioned all the way in the beginning, you were suggesting is that let's say the message should be adjusted to media. I think it was Les Binet that said media imposes inescapable boundary on creativity. Did I get you right in that?
Correct. It's something I strongly believe in, and it's what I've been largely, I'd say, researching for the past 3 years, is how these creative effectiveness principles change per media channel. So Les Binet is completely right. That is a quote by Les, and it's completely right. I would take it as further and saying that marketers and creatives and strategists need to respect why someone is within a media channel and start to look for and appreciate the value exchange. So one example is out of home. Out of home works in high frequency, a couple second glances. Obviously, that will change how your creative idea needs to be expressed within out of home compared to a 30-second TV ad. Similarly, when you're in short form these days, like channels like TikTok, people are there to be entertained. They're there for a bit of escapism, to be entertained. Advertising must respect, appreciate that, and mirror that. So, of course, these creative ideas, and you see the best brands in the world doing this, the ones that are actually growing, actually, before they've even chosen their idea, they're asking themselves, can this idea stretch across media channels? What does it look like if a creator was doing it? What does it look like in out of home? Because that will allow you to be consistent across those channels later down the line. It's a really important lesson of modern marketing. To prove my point, I was with a client. I was working with a client recently. They have this brilliant new idea, but it's new. It's not very simple, and they've followed the textbook. They've executed that idea across TV, digital video, social, and out of home. I drove past some of their out of home the other day, and I didn't get it. It was, for me, it looked like a bad execution. And then when I met the team, was walking them through it, well, it became apparent that actually, and this is actually just good planning in general, the idea would make sense and would work and land if you give it a bit of breathing room, like with high attention channels, cinema, radio, TV. But it's not quite ready to go into those lower attention channels yet. So when you start understanding how a channel works, and then you can actually start proper creative strategy, and it changes how you work very quickly. So I think that quote that from Les, the media imposes inescapable boundaries on creativity, I don't think many people talk about that. I think it's one of the smartest things that Les Binet has shared with us, and his gold in there for marketing.
He has shared many smart things.
True.
All credit. Yeah. So you mentioned something right in between that when you mentioned that it was not ready for the channel. Do you suggest that sometimes it makes more sense when you start campaigns to start on perhaps other channels before you go to channels which have less attention span of the listener or the audience in this case?
Great. Another good example of how we can have a nuanced conversation, me and you, but this would get too simplified if it was committed to paper somewhere. If you actually look at the work of Karen Nelson Field, really, her kind of attention work, looking at brand growth for her business, Amplified Intelligence, And so you see similar things at Lumen as well, the attention agency. I would go as far as saying it's not even campaigns that you need to think about and creative ideas that you need to think about in this context. You also need to think about your brand life cycle. So the higher attention media channels have a chance to create brand growth, even for challenger brands. And for all brands, but when you start getting into these lower attention media channels where you haven't got those memory structures to refresh, because it's much easier to refresh memory structures than to build new ones. It is so hard to build a long-standing, healthy brand with lower attention channels only. And that's a shame because it makes marketing difficult, because they're the cheaper channels that challenger brands can only get into. So it makes creativity and earning that attention in these lower attention media channels so important, but that's difficult to do. So you often see that these skippable lower attention media channels aren't that great for building memories for challenger brands unless your creativity is really high. Yeah. And then when you start thinking about that as well, then you start thinking about, okay, when I deploy a campaign, what is the phasing? What is the next? How does the next 5 years look like? And often the smartest thing to do when you've got a new positioning or idea is, unless it's a killer idea that earns attention, is really emotional and can do the hard work on those memory structures. And actually, the safer bet is to go into higher attention media channels to build those memory structures, and then you can open it up to lower attention media channels. We've seen this before though, right? You used to buy a 30-40 second TV ad, and then you'd follow up later on with your 20-second edit to extend reach and frequency and take advantage of ad stock. So it's not a new principle, but I don't think anyone and many people are thinking like this, and it does transform how good your campaign will be. I'll give one more example. I was working with a client at the moment who, actually a few years ago, that maybe fell for our that third pitfall we were talking about, where right-brained advertising can be a bit cookie-cutter. They decided they were going to launch a animal brand character, because all the research says that's a highly effective thing to do, and it is. But they launched their TV campaign, brand new brand actually, brand new idea, very small challenger brand. It was a 5-star, this ad in the TV campaign. It was entertaining, it was emotional. It gave people 30 seconds to greet and get to know this new character. Their out of home work was 1-star. It was a shot of their character with a product shot, for example. They hadn't built the memory structures to take advantage of the power of out of home yet. So again, it's a very good example. I mean, whose role is this these days in an agency to connect those creative and media dots? We've fallen afoul of this, right? Creative and media kind of works in silos. It begs to us getting back to proper connections planning and media and creative starting to work together again.
That's so interesting. Now, you mentioned twice something that is perhaps even more interesting than what you said. That's Orlando's right brain work.
Yeah.
I'm not sure all of us know what it means. So if you can explain it a bit more, that's because this is really fundamental of how good advertising works.
So this actually made me quit my job at Diageo.
Oh, how cool is that?
At System One. Yeah. So someone at Diageo actually gave me Orlando's book and said, our work should be more right-brained. I was okay. I don't know what that means. Let me read the book first. It changed how I think about advertising. And I came and worked at System One after that because I think it's a fundamental lesson. One of a handful of effectiveness lessons we've learned in the past decade that transforms how a marketer should work, and it is the acid test between a marketer that is just doing the 9 to 5 and getting through the day, and one that's actually growing a brand. So Orlando's been building on the work of Ian McGilchrist, who is essentially many things. including a psychologist. He's written 2 books. So what Orlando has done is looked at his work, which essentially is not this old legacy idea of the brain hemispheres doing different things, but they do things differently. So our left hemisphere is very goal orientated, a stronger inhibitory power on our right hemisphere. And it's very interested in the explicit and the narrow. It holds a narrow focus on the world. And our right hemisphere, which can be easily inhibited by our left hemisphere, holds a very broad attention on the world. It's interested in the whole and the context. It's more rooted in emotion. It's more sensitive to noradrenaline, which is our reward for keeping vigilance on the world, whereas our left hemisphere is more sensitive to dopamine, which is our task completing reward. Yes. So if you're scrolling on TikTok, you're very much in your left brain wanting more dopamine. Whereas if you're perhaps watching enjoying a scenery develop in front of you, you're being very right-brained. So what he's done is he's mapped this world onto advertising, where it's almost like the 95-5 rule from Ehrenberg Bass and the LinkedIn B2B Institute, where 5% of people are in market today, and these numbers change slightly per category, and it's quite easy to work out, but let's just say 5% of people are in market today to buy a car. Actually, it's more like 1% for car buying. So let's say Coca-Cola. I want to buy a soft drink today, 5%. You're in your very left-brained attention there. You're trying to complete a task of buying Coca-Cola. So advertising that is very explicit, rational, repetitive, unilateral, being sold at, is very good at capturing that demand. Whereas 95% of people aren't going to buy Coca-Cola today, but they might buy Coca-Cola in the next decade. So it's very important for us to build memories with those 95% of people, because that's how brands grow. But you won't speak to them by assuming they're interested today, because they're not. So we must get their broad attention. We must create advertising that's very interesting or entertaining to them to influence future behavior. And Orlando's coined 15 kind of example features that speak to this content: a clear sense of place, dialogue, people interacting and touching, music with melody. This kind of advertising doesn't assume someone's interested. It earns the interest and it influences behavior for years to come. And we've seen that kind of advertising creates more emotion, more attention, literally in Orlando's research and research that I've done. And it builds more lasting brand effects. So once you've been handed that tool, which is a brilliant tool to be handed, it quickly allows you to actually connect media and creative back together. Because if a piece of advertising is right-brained, it belongs at the top of the media funnel. It should be targeted at everyone. Whereas if it's left-brained, it belongs at the bottom of the media funnel. It should be targeted at those who are interested today. So that's kind of a 2-minute whistle-stop tour of decades of research.
What Professor Koen Pauwels once mentioned, I don't think he actually acknowledges or understood himself how to the point and beautiful the quote was. If others zig, you zag. Like if everybody puts in an animal character or a brand character, I mean, then at one point it becomes a cliche and it loses its entertainment value. Or am I wrong?
I think there has been too much focus placed on uniqueness in the creative industry.
Oh, how interesting.
I do a lot of research into consistency. I would say familiarity is a much more powerful tool than shock, surprise, and uniqueness. I believe it plays a role, but the majority of marketers are not following, best practice, not following the rules, not sticking with what they're doing for long enough for any real consensus in the market from normal people, consumers, to ever start getting bored or think it's a cliche. Marketing is inconsequential to people and advertising is. However, I also don't think marketing and advertising is black and white. There's many ways for a campaign to win. I think there's many levers of creativity for advertising to pull. Uniqueness is certainly one of them. That's what I think a lot of people champion as creativity, and creative awards often lead into the new or the unique ideas and celebrate those. But I also think how emotionally engaging creativity is another brilliant way of demonstrating creativity. I think whether an idea, an asset, or a campaign can be made broadly interesting to more people is another way of demonstrating creativity. I also think imaginative repetition is another example. I actually think that's the most impressive lever of creativity, where you can carry on doing something whilst keeping it interesting, consistently executing an idea like Marmite or Specsavers or Compare the Market have done. But let's just bear in mind, advertising works in mysterious different ways, and that's why humans and agencies and millions of people work in this industry, because it's about what's the business problem, what's the marketing goal, how are we going to do this with the tools at our disposal.
And Andrew, you said so many interesting things, and I'm Dutch, so you don't have to be diplomatic. Basically, what you were saying is that uniqueness is overrated, and that is very true.
Yeah. No, of course. Cannes and other creative awards are often about uniqueness. You get some creative awards leaning into craft exclusively, and that's why I like effectiveness awards, like Effie and the IPA, because it's about how will we use these creative tools, not just uniqueness or craft, to create additional incremental profit and market share. I think that's the study that I'm more interested in.
That's super interesting. And Andrew, you mentioned earlier something that got me thinking. We actually had a session with Dr. Sarah Stein. Dr. Sarah Stein, she's very much focused on campaigns, on how to convince people, but with an activism and a political background. So she looks at behavioral change totally different than us marketeers, and I found it very enlightening. And we came towards a discussion about negativity and how negativity works so tremendously well in political advertising. Basically, during our discussion, I'm not sure if it was recorded, I think it's partly live on the podcast as well, we mentioned that negativity is actually underrated in advertising. Now, I don't want to sound like Dr. Doom and bring in this negativity into this world like this, but if it's effective, we should talk about it. Has there been any research done on the effect of negativity? Of the impression I had is that negativity is underrated in advertising and can be used more. But perhaps you have research on that, and perhaps you have more information on that than I have.
Yes, yeah. I think there's bits of research dotted around, but I'm currently writing a new publication with Effie and System 1 to help prove this further. Advertising is about creating memories. There's lots of academic research that shows that heightened emotional arousal is what creates more memory structures.
Yes.
So that's kind of a fact that's accepted within academia. Then we have to think about how memories influence behavior, and that's through heuristics. There's the affect heuristic, the familiarity heuristic, and to name three that really do drive how brands grow. The affect heuristic, which is if something comes to mind and it feels good, it's the right choice. The familiarity heuristic, if something comes to mind and it's familiar, it's the right choice. And the fluency heuristic, if something comes to mind rapidly, it's the right choice. And that stuff stopped us eating berries that would kill us when we were limping around and trying to make fires. So there's a negative impact of being dull and not getting any emotional is because you'll build less memory structures. So John Evans, Peter Field, and Adam Morgan has done some research, and it's called The Cost of Dull, which used various data sets to show that advertising that leaves people feeling apathetic, neutral, costs more to change behavior, because you're literally building less memory structures. However, in all of Orlando Woods, System 1's and my own research, positive emotions, not just any emotion, is what will change long-term behavior. Why is that? Because when a brand comes to mind and it feels like a good, and it feels good, it feels like a good choice. Now, this appears to be very, very controversial for some, very impressive and very storied chief strategy officers around the world. But I don't think it is that controversial. I see it in all my research. So, for example, when I've connected the emotional response of hundreds of out-of-home campaigns with JCDeco's brand studies for campaigns, looking at whether these campaigns were able to change brand image, so whether they were able to change implicit brand characteristics. There's a negative correlation between how neutral these campaigns made people feel. So the more neutral you feel, the less brand image change. There's an even more negative correlation between how negative people feel and brand image growth. So if you make people feel angry, fear, sad, it changes less brand image. And there's positive correlations between happiness and surprise and brand image change. I mean, I was taught from a very young, early on as an FMCG marketer that our job, before I even knew what effectiveness was, that our job was to surprise and delight consumers. I mean, that just covers everything that we've learned across emotion over the past decade, right? Our job is to surprise and delight because it goes into good things. And we see it in the FE research I've done at the moment, where we have tested thousands of ads and connected them to thousands of campaigns across the world in the FE case library, which represents around $140 billion of market share. So this huge kind of set of not just FE winners, but anyone that's entered an FE. It's quite a representative set of brands. And we see positive motion having a really interesting impact here. We see it create more brand effects, awareness gain, this kind of stuff, because it builds more memories. But it creates even more brand effects if you carry on your campaign for longer. So you get this compounding effect of positive emotion where it pays back more over time, and you can influence more and more business results over time. So you see that the more positive a piece of emotionally intense and positive, which is essentially what System 1 star rating measures, a piece of advertising is, you see the longer the campaign runs, the more those effects compound. Now, I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all of advertising. What we're measuring there, the emotional response to ad, is the output of strategy, planning, the creative idea, the execution. But you could still get a positive emotion and do fuck all. You could be building the wrong memories. If I was an ice cream brand and I'd done my, this speaks to the whole category entry point research from, Ehrenberg Bass and Baron Sharp. If I was an ice cream brand and decided I'm going to do all my advertising around football, we're going to become the ice cream that you have to have at a football game. And I make the most distinct, emotional, consistent, long-running campaign. And the entire idea was to build and own that occasion. Then you'd see fuck all, wouldn't you? Because no one's eating ice cream at a football game. You might get some kind of fallout effect. So if you tried really hard, sure, you probably see 1,000% growth in ice cream sales in football. However, that's not the occasion that has all the value. You should be going after the beach or sunny or party or something like this.
Yeah,
so
very good.
You still need your strategy, and then emotion amplifies that. It is a bit of a to and fro, though. So your strategy helps to lead to a strong emotional ad, but your emotion helps supercharge your strategy, that positioning and the associations you need to build for your brand. So I could go on about emotion all day long. I get quizzed on it multiple times a day. So that's my kind of take on negative versus positive. And finally, we've also done that research within charity as well. So you often get, charity clients at System 1 will go, well, look, no, we see the biggest donations if we make these these guys cry. We need to turn on the water up. We need to make them feel bad. That will get them to pick up the phone. Yes, of course, if you get a really intense emotion, including negative, you'll drive sudden behavior change. But what we found in our research, I think it was with Media Lab, was that similarly to any other brand, if a charity ad makes people feel good, you actually see those emotions transfer onto the charity brand, and that changes future donation.
Long-term.
So you see, like with Dogs Trust, a charity in the UK, there's really positive emotional advertising. Their charity advertising is some of the most effective in terms of driving donation. So I think it's true for all categories.
So first of all, there's such a nice positive message. So we'll just take that with us and keep it there. Coming back to an earlier discussion we had. So in my previous job, we actually did a lot of research on charities, because charities is very values based, as you can imagine. The type of charity that you donate to is very close to your value set. And there we actually saw that there is a large difference in your type of messaging that you have to which value set of people you address to. How social climber people are orientated, or how cosmopolitan they are, or mainstream or traditional they are. And this is something that I found incredibly interesting, is that there we actually measured it. This is so Andrew, we are coming closer to the end of the session. Honestly, we could talk for hours. I find it really fascinating.
That went very quick, didn't it? Crikey. Okay.
Yes, because you mentioned very briefly in between, what channels are the most underrated?
Interesting. Great question.
It depends on your message, of course.
Well, not your message. Advertising isn't trying to land messages. It's trying to change behaviors. So
exactly.
But anyway, well, look, I do a lot of this kind of research, and so does a lot of very impressive agencies. But my first point of call would be check. When you're looking at these data points and these charts, please check the citations. Is it on market? Is this stuff believable before you go, oh, great, I need to plow all my money into this? Because, things change per market. Like Ireland, you can get, I think 20% of media spend in Ireland is actually through radio, whereas, broad national radio. Whereas in the US, it's a rounding error, radio these days. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. Generally, though, radio is an underrated channel. And it just makes sense when you study this stuff and you've done marketing for long enough. It's like, it's very broad reach in most markets.
I totally agree.
When you look at go have a look at where you work and what market you work in, and even for your demographic, you'll be surprised at how much radio will reach your customers. And then go look at the CPM. CPM's a shite metric, but let's look at the CPM. It's often 5 times cheaper than TV.
It is. It is cheap as, I won't mention it here. And so you can get so much more value. And on top of it, it's an emotional medium.
Exactly. I wrote my first kind of publication. I wrote a book on this with Radio Centre in the UK, where we test a lot of radio ads in a very similar, in fact, the same way we test TV ads. The average emotional response to radio is the same as an audio visual piece. And but there's a downfall with radio where brands aren't very distinct audio wise. Don't plow into radio without knowing what your audio branding strategy is. And people underestimate how slowly and clearly and how regularly you need to just say your brand name on radio.
Yes.
Like no one's pulling over their car to listen to your radio ad. Be realistic. The other channel as well, I think, outdoor, I think, is massively underrated. I think some agencies have done themselves no favors by, I think they're relegating outdoor to retail media, where they're trying to eke out growth in outdoor to programmatic wins. getting closer to the purchase, the point of purchase, trying to sell outdoor that's outside of Tesco. And actually, that skips over the beauty of outdoor, which is a brand building medium. Like, of course, it's very kind of it's low paid attention, but it's high frequency. And in a lot of markets, it's a last standing broad reach medium. In the UK, it's above 90% adults weekly is the outdoor reach, which is insane. And there's all sorts of facets you need to think about in media channels. Outdoors incredibly public, like radio, so it builds different kind of associations around trust and fame, and social proofing, that will never be in your strategy or your plan, and they're just accidental things the media channel does for you. But you'll quickly see after 10 years, that's the stuff that sets your brand apart from the other brands.
So right there, you mentioned another beautiful jewel, social proofing. So this is actually stronger in emerging markets. So in emerging markets, the word of mouth and social proofing is so much more important, because you ask many people around you for evaluation of products and brands, which is less the case apparently in more mature markets where frequency is much more important.
Interesting.
And that means that outdoor is relatively more powerful in markets where social proofing is more important. This is something that I have a feeling is still underestimated in marketing, the differences of how we look as social beings to advertising.
Yeah, and I imagine it would be different for categories as well.
Yes.
I truly don't care what toothpaste my mate's using, but I care what cocktail he drinks on a Friday.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much, Andrew. Is there a last word you would like to say?
If anything, it's just a plea from the work I've been doing with Mark Ritson over the past 6 months, where I think we're encouraging marketers to be a bit more lazy. Marketers are very busy. We like to keep ourselves busy and convincing ourselves that we're creating value, changing things, changing packs, a new ad, a new agency, a new logo. Or how about we refresh that tagline? And we're ruining a lot of great advertising by being too busy. So if you're that kind of marketer, just myself and Mark Ritson will encourage you to clock off at 4 o'clock, go for a slow walk, skip that meeting, roll yourself a cigar, just chill out a little bit and change less. So that would be my final plea.
Well, that's a beautiful way to go out. So Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much. I honestly enjoyed it myself. I learned a lot myself. There are a lot of, you say so many interesting things, like in offhand, by the way type of way. And then, on each of them, you could go deeper for at least 10 minutes in discussion. So thanks a lot for the discussion. I'm very sure our listeners will find this very interesting session.
Good. Amazing, mate. Well, look, so it took so long to get in, and that was very interesting. So thank you so much.